Hi everybody, my name is Ian Willoughby. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of In Conversation With on Havel Channel. This time our guest is Edward Einhorn. Welcome, Edward. Edward is a theatre director, a playwright, and also a novelist, and is artistic director of the Rehearsal for Truth International Theatre Festival, which is run by the Václav Havel Centre and the Bohemian Benevolent and Literary Society in New York. Edward, the first question I'd like to ask you is, when did you first encounter the work, the plays of Václav Havel?
The first time I ever read a Havel play was my freshman year in college, and that was, to give away how old I am, but that was 1988. I was looking for a one-act to direct, and there was a stack of one-acts in the library, and I was going through them, and I found Audience, and I fell in love with it, and I wanted to direct it. It actually didn't happen because it was just the beginning of my freshman year, and they were asking older students. But it led me to start reading some of Havel's work, and then it seemed like almost as soon as I had found him, there was a Velvet Revolution, and it felt so surreal to me that this absurdist playwright was leading a revolution, becoming president. It felt like, Czechoslovakia must be the most wonderful place on earth where they find an absurdist playwright to be their president.
And what was it about Havel's work that grabbed you in that way initially?
I thought that stylistically, I've always been a fan of absurdism, and so I picked it up already being a fan of Ionesco and Beckett and Stoppard and all sorts of playwrights who had a sort of connection to him. What I was really impressed with the Audience is that the compassion he showed for the brewmaster and the insight into who he was, and despite the sort of relation and autobiographical connections to Vaniak. So that really impressed me. And the next piece I read was the memorandum, and playing with language and using language as a tool and as a cudgel at times really spoke to me as well. So it sort of caught all the things that I love about playwriting and theater.
And I know you met Havel personally. When did your paths first cross?
So the first thing I ever directed in New York was Audience, because I had never gotten a chance to do it in college, and so I finally did it in New York. But then I didn't really come back to Havel until about 2003. So I had recently done the Ionesco Festival, a festival of all of Ionesco's work. And I wanted to find a new playwright to concentrate on, and Havel seemed a natural choice. So I got in touch with Jika Slopova, his agent, and asked whether they might consider something. And at the time, I was also dating someone whose family was in Germany. So I was spending the summer in Germany. And so I said to her, let's just go to Prague. If it works out, it works out. If not, we visited Prague. And so we went to Prague. And on the way to Prague, I heard back from Jitka that she wanted to meet. And so we ended up meeting and talking about the festival, and really making all the plans for the festival. Then Havel was going to join us as well, but he was feeling under the weather, and so he wasn't able to. So I didn't actually get to meet him at that point. But that's when everything was planned.
And you did meet him in 2006 at the time of the
Yes,
festival.
So then we planned everything, and then in 2006 he came over, and the happy coincidence is about a year before Columbia University called me and said, we'd like to bring him over for his 70th birthday, and we were planning the festival for the 70th birthday. And we'd like to present some of his plays. I know you have the rights to his plays at this point. Are you okay with that? And I said, sure. But this is ideal because if you're able to host him for the whole period of the festival, that would be wonderful. So they were bringing him over, and they had a reception for him. And this was the first time I met him, and it was this huge reception. So many people that I've always wanted to meet actually were there. And
he was like a rock star. Like
yes, right? It was a little overwhelming for me, and a little overwhelming, I think, for him. And finally, I came to say hello to him, and he was sort of, also jet lagged and didn't know quite who I was. And then Halka Kaiserova, who was the consul general in New York at the time, explained to me, "Oh, this is Edward Einhorn. He's doing the festival." And immediately, he beamed. It was very, very welcoming and was very kind, despite his exhaustion and everything, the sort of madness around him. And so that was my first encounter with him.
And what impression did he make on you at the personal level?
So what's amazing about Havel, I think, and I'm not the only person to say this, is that, despite his fame and his, accomplishments, he was very easy to approach, very easy to chat with, and more and more. So he was there for 3 months, and he came to the theater a lot, and I got to see him a lot, and also sort of outside the theater sometimes, and it really felt a kinship to him as a person of the theater. I felt like that's where he was first, in his heart. And whenever he was in the theater, it felt like this is where he belonged.
What was the appeal for you of doing the Havel Festival, of doing all of his plays, right? What was the attraction?
So both with that and with the UNESCO Festival, I feel like you learn something totally new about a playwright by seeing all their works together. And UNESCO was overwhelming. We had over 30 plays because UNESCO has written quite a lot. Havel at the time had written 17. Leaving wasn't yet written at the time. I thought that seeing that you can see where he developed, how he developed, what the common themes were, and each one sort of built on each other. And I felt like it made them stronger as a result.
And had you been familiar with all of them prior to the festival?
I hadn't been familiar with all of them because some of them were not really available in English. We had a lot of new translations for the festival. Some of them were translations of existing pieces, like Paul Wilson redid the memorandum, and with the memo, that was one piece I direct, and Jan Novak redid some of the Vaniak plays. But some of them, Carol Rockamora translated 3 or 4 plays that had never been translated. There was The Conspirators, which was almost on a Mountain Hotel, which there was a translation, but it's not a published translation. So there was a lot of stuff that wasn't really available.
And you were telling me earlier that you also translated some of Havel's plays. Was this also during the festival?
So that was after the festival. So I discovered a couple of short pieces, The Pig and Ella Hella and the Hitch, that he had written, and that were not part of a festival. And I thought, oh no, I wish they had been, but they're not in English. So I was learning Czech at the time, but my Czech was not, and still is not, great. And so I was working with a tutor, Katarina Liu, and I asked her to help me with the translations, and she did. It was really exciting to do.
Getting back to the festival, were there any particular plays that were especially challenging to put on?
I thought The Conspirators and Mountain Hotel would be particularly hard. And both times the director found an ingenious way to do it. So The Conspirators, it's never done. But there was this new translation by Carol Rocamora, and the director, Kemat Shalat, decided to put it in apartments, because inspired by the way that the original, say, Vonick plays were done in people's apartments. Though in this case, it was very wealthy people who had large apartments. And she convinced Kathleen Turner to play the lead role. And so it was sort of this event that happened in these. So we had 3 different apartment performances and 1 free performance in the theater. And that was neat. I thought each one was a little different, and it was a neat experience. And then the Mountain Hotel was done by Michael Gardner in a tiny theater called The Brick in Brooklyn, and he did it environmentally. So there was he made false walls, and you could only have about 20 people sitting there, and they're almost involved in the play. And Havel came to that, and so it was particularly noticeable when he came to that one because he was in the midst of the play as well. Really, he thought it was his favorite of the whole festival. It was which is amazing because it's not one of the ones that people do that much.
And did Havel give you or any of the directors notes on the stagings?
So the first thing he came to was my production of The Memo, which I directed. And he was sitting in the front row, I was sitting in the back row, and I was terrified that he would like it. And the show started, and he started laughing, and I thought, oh, thank God. And the audience was laughing, and he seemed to be enjoying it. And I went to talk to him afterwards, and he gave me one note that was sort of stuck with me. So, there's that silent character in The Memo, as there are silent characters in so many of his pieces. So this will relate to, before he arrived, the Secret Service people came and sat down and checked out the place. And they were always sort of there, but like hovering in the background and whatever. And the way I staged it, I had the silent character very active in terms of like responding and doing this, had a little bit of a clownish thing. And he said, no. Those people, they just stand and they watch. And that's all they do. They don't say, they don't participate, they just stand and watch. And I thought, I thought about the fact that he's always been watched. Whether it's as president by the Secret Service who were on his side, or previously by the government, officials who were not on his side. But he's always had these people sort of silently watching him.
Who were the audiences for the festival? Were they people who were knowledgeable about Havel's work, or were they drawn to the name of Havel?
There was a mixture. There were some people who were very knowledgeable, but a lot of people were encountering, and I would say the majority were encountering his work almost for the first time. Maybe they'd heard of him. Maybe some of them had not even.
And did any of the plays prove particularly successful with the audiences, or particularly go down well?
The Vonick plays really resonated. And it's interesting, even in a different time, in a different place, how well they resonated with people. I think that, I hesitate to say The Memo because of the one I directed, but I think there was a good reaction to that. Largo de Salado and Mountain Hotel.
And did his humor go over to an American audience, do you feel?
Yes, that is actually one of the first things that he talked about. He said, I was afraid that it would not convey. And then we talked about how the humor, the New York humor, actually is very similar to the Czech humor. And by New York humor, in some ways, I mean a certain Jewish humor. There's like a self-deprecation and like an assumption of underdog status. And it really connected with the audience as well.
You have spent time here in Czechia. You've been here several times, I'm sure. Do you feel there's something specifically Czech about Havel's writing?
There is, I mean, yes, there is something particularly Czech, but I also feel like it has a universality, and I've seen all sorts of audiences connect to it. I've gone to productions in multiple countries and seen people respond.
What would you say is objectively the best Havel play?
Objectively the best. I don't think there is an objectively the best. The first play I read was Audience. I fell in love with it. I'm still in love with it. So I probably, return to that, but I don't know that there is an objective number one.
And are there any of the plays that you find particularly hard to appreciate or challenging?
There are a few. There's one reconstruction. Sometimes it's translated the architecture. It doesn't quite resonate with me as well. The Conspirators I find hard. Honestly, I think even Havel found it hard. He found it. He would talk about how it's flawed and never quite worked. Yeah.
I guess a common thing people say or ask about Havel is if those plays still resonate much today, or are they very much of their time? What would you say to that?
A lot of people asked me that when I was doing the festival, and then people came to the festival and they said, "Oh my God, it does resonate." And this happened also with Ionesco, and I'll say, Ionesco was particularly interesting because it happened right before our premiere was on September 6, 2001. And of course, 5 days later was September 11th in New York. And it was a 3-month festival until we closed for a week and we came back. And suddenly absurdism made sense to everybody. And I think that unfortunately, the world as we know it is getting more absurd, not less. And these works resonate as a result.
And speaking about theatre of the absurd, where do you think Havel sits in relation to, for example, Ionesco?
I mean, he's clearly inspired by it. And having done the translation of Wilhelm the Hitch, you see this immediate connection. But even in the memo, you can. He's inspired by all of it. I mean, I think that absurdism is partially about finding comedy and tragedy. And anyone who lives in those worlds, whether it's post-World War II or communist Czechoslovakia or honestly the world of today, can find those,
Do you ever feel like you see any traces of inspiration of Havel in other playwrights, like contemporary playwrights today?
That's an interesting question, because it's hard to tell whether it comes from Havel or one of the other absurdists, or I think there are techniques he has in terms of like repetition and his use of language and the quirky use of language, but that you do see, but it's also stylistically connected to absurdism as a whole. So it's hard to pull it out as saying to this one.
Are Havel's plays performed much in the States nowadays?
Sometimes, but not that frequently. Every few years there's like an off-Broadway production or something of that sort, but it's not a constant thing.
I guess at this stage, his political writings and his essays, and of course his amazing life story, are probably the things that overshadow everything else, overshadow the plays. But what role do you think the plays can play in preserving Havel's legacy?
I'm always a theater person first, and I think that understanding, him through his plays and Czech society through his plays is really important in terms of understanding his role in the world, and he wouldn't have that role in the world without his theater.
You're also artistic director of the Rehearsal for Truth Theatre Festival. Yeah. Can you describe what it does or what it is?
Yes, this was formed about 7 years ago by Pavla Niklova, and I took it over about a year ago. And it's really a collection of plays from Central and Eastern Europe that continue in the legacy of Havel, both artistically and politically. So there's plays that actually travel here, and then we have plays that come from the United States. So it's American actors doing Central and Eastern European work.
And over the years, what have been some of the more successful projects within the festival?
There are constant intriguing pieces, and I think the Polish. So we work with the Polish Cultural Institute, Slovakian Cultural Institute, et cetera, et cetera, and so. They're all one-night pieces, and I'm hesitant to point to one over the other right now because there's
You were telling me earlier that you're also involved with the Václav Havel Centre. You're quite active. What do you do for the Václav Havel Centre?
So besides putting together the Rehearsal for Truth Festival, I work with the student mini drama contest. I think the library has also been involved in that. So we do student plays that are inspired by Václav Havel. Then we arrange for the students to go back and forth between Prague and New York or Brno sometimes in order to participate in classes and also see the work that's being done in both places.
You're also, of course, a playwright yourself. For people who don't know your work, could you characterize your theatre?
So we are also inspired by Theatre of the Absurd. We're very big on showing the theatricality, so not hiding the strings. We often use with puppets, and technology and music, and there's a lot of hybrid work. So our next work is going up at La Mama in April, and it's in opera/play/Passover Seder. So people participate in a Passover Seder. There's an opera in the center, but a play that surrounds it.
My final question, what state is theatre in now in New York after COVID and those difficult years?
It's not great.
People didn't come back?
Audience is slowly coming back. We were probably about 75% or so, maybe 80. The funding is in a terrible state because we're dependent on foundations and private donors a lot in the United States, and they have moved elsewhere with their funding. And government fund is not interested in funding so much. In fact, they've cut recently. And with less audience, it's just the financial crush has been terrible.
Well, I hope things improve for you guys in the future. Edward Einhorn, thank you very much for joining us here on In Conversation With on Havel Channel. And please join us again soon for other editions.